universe began, light has remained unchanged. Now man has created a new kind of light with powers and properties unlike anything that existed before. Laser light.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the OX2C podcast. I'm Ryan, and this is John, my co-host here. So last time we went over a little recap. We went over mRNA vaccinations and the mRNA ingredients, which I brought to the table, and then John talked about the PIC gel, which just was about cultivating stem cells using this certain gel called PIC. So if you guys are interested in that, go ahead. We did record it, so it's on YouTube if you guys did miss that recording. But yeah, so we're going to go straight into John's articles for today. And so John, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. So last week, Ryan Ryan did a wonderful job talking about how these mRNA vaccines work. And sort of continuing on the steam from that last podcast, I wanted to also do a little more research into some of the latest developments with COVID-19. So I have for you, Ryan, here, let's see. So you're familiar with like how different people have very different symptoms to COVID-19, right?
Yeah, somewhat. It all varies between person to person.
Right. Some people have no effect whatsoever. And some people, become deathly ill. I mean, they have to get sent to the ICU, hooked to a respirator. Some very, very severe symptoms. But you're just aware, it's very variable, right?
And also it depends on, I think the allergic reactions on people. So, some people are allergic to peanut butter versus people are allergic to almonds.
Oh, really? So you're saying, there's proof that maybe pre-existing allergic conditions could worsen this, or?
All I'm saying is that people react differently to this vaccination. Everyone is going to react differently, just as everyone has their own. Yeah, to the vaccine has their own allergic reactions to everything else.
Okay, no, that's an excellent point. But I think the article that I have for us today talks about more specifically why the virus itself, for some people causes no symptoms and causes serious illness or death in others. So this comes from SciTech Daily. And according to the Translation Genomics Research Institute, it's quite a mouthful. It's an affiliate for the City of Hope. They've actually identified a gene that might be able to explain why it is that the variation in symptom intensity is for most people. And it isn't. This gene isn't from the virus; it's in humans. So you might have a different version of this gene than I do. And Ryan, when was the last time you took AP Bio again? I think we laughed over this. It was I think it was around 4 years or something.
Yeah, it was the junior year of my high school.
Junior year, okay.
So yeah, I think about 4 years from now.
Nice. Well, it's good. We have some knowledge of biology.
Yeah.
So there's this gene produces something called miR1307. So it's like another joke. I guess it's a running joke for us is like how terribly scientists seem to name some of these things.
Yeah.
At least
I feel like the more I've researched into gene names, like space telescopes, what they name them, the more bizarre the names become.
Yeah, they go pretty crazy with that kind of stuff. But basically, there's this gene, so it produces a molecule of DNA. It's called miR1307. And it serves as a kind of switch that turns various genes within the virus itself on or off, which makes the disease have varying severity. And it can control things like how quickly the virus reproduces. So I remember in your last podcast, we kind of had a quick overview of the biology, like how the whole transcription thing works. And you remember back then, we didn't quite remember, did mRNA, which way it went. Well, I think before I go any further, how about we kind of clarify that real quick for our viewers? How does that sound?
That sounds great.
All right. So I think we got to start. Like every cell in our body has red blood cells don't have nuclei, but most, the large majority of our body cells have a nucleus, and that nucleus contains. Let's see. Okay, I'll keep that. So that nucleus contains genetic material inside of it, and there's an enzyme called RNA polymerase. And what it does is it kind of looks at that DNA strand and it spits out that mRNA strand. And the mRNA strand kind of goes out of the nucleus, and it's inside the rest of the cell. And that's where our ribosomes come in. And the ribosomes read the mRNA, and they figure out the proteins, like which proteins need to be combined, or amino acids need to be combined to create proteins. I think that's a decent explanation. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Honestly, that sounded very similar to the things I had to regurgitate to my teacher, RNA
oh my
polymerase
goodness,
and all that stuff.
the five, what is it, like 5-3, right? Like the leading and lagging strand, and
Right.
oh man, yeah, it's but yeah, so I think that's just enough to figure out what this article is about. So this piece of DNA, this I'm just going to call it 1307, is also found to affect the severity of certain cancers, lung disease, and flu, such as H1N1. So it's not just for COVID, but it's been historically noticed like it has effects on other kinds of diseases as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. So there's already some existing precedent for how it works, but it's just now recently been shown to have like an effect. So there's a team led by Nicholas Stork. So he's sort of the director of TGen's quantitative medicine and systems biology division. And what they did was that in order to find this little piece of DNA, they actually compared different kinds of coronaviruses. So were you aware of like the fact that we call it the coronavirus, but actually it's like a whole family, right?
Right. As much as I know, it started with this, like the SARS, and it's sort of just like a branch off of what we know from this, like the hierarchy of SARS and COVID-19, and there's like different strains.
No, you're pretty much on. You hit it on the head there. I'm not certain chronologically if SARS is like the precursor for all of them, but I think like the family of viruses has been around for ages, I think. And what happened is, SARS is sort of like gained prominence considering the prior pandemics, and but it's a whole family. So the coronavirus is a whole family, and COVID-19 is just one of the members of that large family. So what they did was they looked at different versions of the coronavirus across different species as well. So not just humans, but animals, and they looked at the DNA sequences, and they found this piece of DNA, or how this gene can actually affect its behavior. Now, the reason it's called sort of miRNA is because it stands for microRNA.
Oh, so wait, for like just typical mRNA, not the miRNA.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Like what's the difference between mRNA and then miRNA?
Okay, that's an excellent question. It leads right into exactly what I wanted to explain. Yeah, we all love a good transition. So mRNA is responsible for generating. It tells the ribosomes in our cells how to manufacture those proteins. But it's only been recently, like I think within like the past 2 decades, that we figured out that miRNA regulates mRNA expression. So what miRNA literally does is it sees the mRNA and it can bind to certain sites of the mRNA and prevent or regulate the expression of certain genes. So it acts as kind of a suppressing mechanism for certain parts of our DNA.
Okay, wait. So the story doesn't just end with mRNA. miRNA is also part of this this story that I guess I haven't heard about miRNA. Not even ET Bio.
Yeah.
Wow. So it binds to
it's
the
very
mRNA.
recent development.
Okay.
It's super recent, and it's there's still a lot of research being done, but it plays a huge role in regulating how like certain genes are like, does that gene get expressed as like protein manufacturing or not? And they're really tiny. Like the reason they're called microRNAs is because they're only roughly 20 nucleotides. So wow. Super tiny.
Wow. Because I mean, comparing that to I guess a normal size DNA sequence of nucleotides, that's really small. Okay, never mind. But yeah, go on, John.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, like I think human DNA is like thousands I think thousands even right. Maybe it's like millions. I'm not sure the exact number, but it's a large number of base pairs. So they call it microRNA because it's so tiny, but it plays a huge role in regulating gene expression. And the fact that COVID is a virus. So we talked last time in our last podcast about how viruses work. They inject the DNA into the host cell, and they trick the host cell into generating more and more copies of itself. But for people who have this this gene that I think produces the the microRNA that I mentioned earlier, 1307, it can actually affect how your cells react to the COVID DNA, the foreign DNA. So it can potentially control the like how quickly COVID can reproduce, which is why some people may have, part of the reason for those varying symptoms may be that expression regulatory mechanism, this sort of microRNA.
Wow, I wonder if they could like use that technology. Yeah, I'm assuming this technology might help people that have these allergic reactions into stopping it before the reaction happens. Would that be something?
I've thought about that too. I'm not. It seems like this is a very recent development. I'm not sure if maybe it's in the future, but who knows?
I'm
maybe
just thinking about it.
For future diseases, if it's viable to control these microRNA expression mechanisms, I think that'd be really powerful.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty interesting little piece of. Oh, and I actually saw the actual like sequence for the mRNA, the exact one I told you about. So for those in the audience or chat that are curious, there's something called BioGPS. There are all these really cool websites you can use for researchers that do DNA research. And if you look up that specific piece of, let me check the title again. I keep calling it. If you look up miR1307, you'll find it. And it's only, I said roughly, most microRNAs are 20 base pairs. This specific one is only 19. So it falls short of the average. But it's amazing to hear like the effect it can have on potentially reducing COVID-19's harmful impact on the human body.
Wow. So okay. So this miRNA can bind to mRNA, right? And it can either stop certain genes that are being expressed from the mRNA strand.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think I didn't look into too much detail, but my hunch here is like if I pretend this ruler is our mRNA, you remember like for each amino acid, it's a codon. So it's like 3 base pairs per each chunk.
Right,
so the miRNA knows how to kind of like glue itself to certain parts, or it forms a complex on the mRNA that prevents the ribosomes from really reading through it and producing the necessary protein. I think that's how it works. If anyone's watching or if anyone's like in chat that knows more about this, but that's like from my cursory gloss over. But I just know for the purposes of this article that the miRNA that's has that regulatory effect. And
this can help people that do get COVID to prevent COVID from expressing itself or from duplicating.
Well, we can't. Ideally, like if we
in a
could,
perfect theory, in theoretical, like I'm talking theoretical.
Okay. I think it can significantly reduce the. It probably can stop a lot of the symptoms, because if you think about it, I just told you earlier, right? It can control COVID's reproduction cycle inside the human body. So if we can slow it down to the point where our medicine or the immune system kind of I don't know has a chance to fight it, or maybe other medicines that take longer have more time, I think that's really great. Although ideally, we'd want to kill it, as soon as it enters the body. Like you don't even want to give it a chance to fester any longer.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, to if you increase the time, it buys us time to, if we were to use like the traditional vaccine method, it could allow that to happen, I guess, safer, because you're increasing the time, and people aren't gonna like quickly get sick, I guess.
No, it's you have a point. In the other COVID-related article that I have, I'm going to introduce you and maybe our audience the idea of what a cytokine storm is. And cytokines are a kind of compound that are responsible for a lot of the deadly inflammation in different parts of the body that cause people to die from COVID. So if we're able to slow down the rate COVID spreads in the body, I think it can actually potentially mitigate that inflammatory response, which I think is great. That's my hypothesis.
Mhm.
Maybe I might be wrong in that regard, but I still think being able to buy time is definitely a valuable thing to be able to do.
Yeah. Um, and I'm just thinking because a lot of things in nature have like an exponential growth or like log based. So if we're able to still increase that time slightly rather than having like an inflammatory response like you were talking about, that would be theoretically speaking, that'd be sweet. You know,
Right, right.
we love time. We always wish we had
Yeah,
more
for
time.
those of you that, Ryan mentioned exponential and log. I think the both of us had a flashback to algorithms.
Even to circuits with
Yeah, yeah. So
your
the
log scaled graphs.
Laplacian, right?
Yeah.
The Bode diagrams and the Laplace transforms. You'll see exponentials and logarithms all over the place. So
Yeah.
if any of you in the audience, are planning on becoming great engineers, you better get comfortable with those values.
Yeah. Decades and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness. But that's kind of the beauty of math, though, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
I think what always amazes me about math in particular is how we see it's a completely abstract notion, right? Like if I asked you, show me one, what would you do?
I'd be like this. I got one finger.
Right, but that's one finger.
Yeah.
But it's not one,
It's not
right? You see,
one. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it amazes me to no end that we were able to sort of come up with this body of knowledge. Oh, all in it's completely theoretical, and then
Mhm.
in nature we find like, oh my goodness, this thing exists in nature, or there's a relationship in nature. And the most extreme example I can think of this is string theory. For the longest time, quantum mechanics, the physical realm has been explained by sort of two bodies of knowledge: quantum mechanics and general relativity. General relativity is fantastic for very large bodies. Like if I asked you, like, if Ryan, if you're an astronaut and you're trying to orbit Earth, like you're just free orbiting Earth,
Mhm.
we can use relativistic mechanics to calculate your orbital trajectory, what physical effects your body might have. And for very small things, like for the transistors in our computers, electrons and super small particles, quantum mechanics does a wonderful job. But there's certain physical scenarios where both of them break down. Like none of them they don't really overlap nicely. And physicists have always been upset at that. They don't like that there are certain, physical phenomena that are not cleanly explainable with quantum mechanics or they don't agree in certain areas, like what happens at the edge of black holes, for example. So string
Right.
theory was kind of an answer. It's a proposed solution to that problem. And a lot of physicists call it, you might hear in the news, they call it the ultimate theory of everything. Have you heard of that
Yeah,
term
yeah,
before?
I have.
Theory
I
of
have.
everything.
Right. So
Because
it's what connects mechanical and like quantum, the different ways of solving problems in physics is is
that's a good surface level interpretation. I think the real nuance here is it's not that we can't get them to play nice. If you do a little more research, or if you take like a first year graduate course in quantum mechanics, you'll learn about relativistic quantum mechanics. So normally in like our undergraduate studies, the electron or the particle is at a really slow speed.
Mhm.
It's sort of we don't really care how fast it's going. But in Europe, or when you're a particle physicist, you're flinging this particle at like 99% the speed of light. So you
Okay.
really need to factor in those like the Lorentz transforms and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
right.
So it's not that they don't really play. It's just that there are certain phenomena, things that happen in nature that neither of them seem to agree on, and we want to
Okay.
find a way to make them play nice. So
Right. Because calculations for going at speed of light are different than if you were just in a car, right?
right. No, precisely. Einstein and Lorentz. I mean, you remember those crazy
Yeah.
problems we had to do, and oh, Bob and Alice is going at like zero point 0.8 the speed of light, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
And she has like
come
a
on,
clock
man.
and she's going on
Yeah,
a
exactly.
train and Bob's stationary. Find
Oh
the
my
time
goodness.
dilation between Bob and Anna.
The thing that kills me though is like for physics, like finding the Lorentz transforms wasn't like I hated the Lorentz transforms, but I loved the Schrodinger equation. Like solving that
I remember
second
you
order.
did.
That was actually fun. But that's because it's relevant to my work in quantum mechanics or quantum computing. So, but I digress. So going back to string theory, the, the basic idea is that normally when we, 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 when we do math with particles, we assume the particles are points, right? They're singular. They have almost little to no mass in our assumption. So with string theory, we actually say that all matter can be represented by these kinds of vibrating strings, and the different configurations of those strings, which are super, super tiny. Like it's almost like, I think, at Planck's length, but these strings vibrate and they loop on themselves, and the way they interact. The math behind this can actually could potentially help, or is promising in explaining those unexplainable phenomena. So that's what it's. But we have yet to find experimental proof. But and there's a lot of argument too, because people are saying, like, a lot of physicists are investing too much time or too much energy into a theory that could be totally wrong. Like, it could, we have to throw it out the window. Because before string theory, there were other, attempts at something like this, but they also sort of fell apart. And going back to why I even talk about string theory is a lot of the math. A lot of math comes out from string theory. Like, there's a lot of new math that we've never seen before. And the really cool thing is mathematicians have been finding more and more new relationships. So like, string theory came up with this thing, and like, okay, whatever. And now mathematicians are like, wait a minute, doesn't that thing solve this other problem that we've been stuck on for decades? And I think that's really cool,
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the beauty behind it, right? You're looking for one thing, but you end up finding a whole range of other things that solve other problems.
Right. I mean, it looks like Scotty's here. What's up, guys? Gotta sleep soon, but I'm enjoying the string theory. I'm very heartened to hear it. I know it's a bit of a tangent.
We ended up on miRNA, and now we're on string theory.
Right. But it's I think just talking about math as sort of like the universal tongue. I mean, math is just beautiful in that sense. You never know where it can take you.
Yeah, and I would have loved to, if I could decide between or minoring in something, it would be mathematics for sure.
I wish I had that kind of confidence. Like, I think Ryan and a lot of my friends can testify that I really appreciate and love math, but I'm pretty terrible. Like on exams. If you saw my exam scores, it's pretty mediocre stuff. But anyways, yeah. You just see a lot of patterns in nature pop up over and over again. And math kind of explains that underlying pattern. But anyways, let's kind of, let's bring it. Oh, Scotty minored in math.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
That's pretty,
that's
hats
pretty,
off to you, man.
That's pretty
more power
poggers,
to you.
dude.
Yeah.
Wow.
Poggers. I'm still, for those of you that don't know, I am very new to the Twitch scene. I've never really bothered to use Twitch or really messed around with it. Ryan's the Twitch expert here. He does a lot of the administrative stuff with our channel. So I mean, like, just a couple weeks ago, I learned about like Poggers, PogChamp, and how about we sort of bring it back to COVID? How about I do my second article?
Yeah,
go for it. Sound, Ryan?
Go for it.
All right, cool. So I mentioned, this really neat thing with this microRNA. So now I've got another thing. This comes from Science Daily, and it talks about how there's some new research that suggests that COVID enters the brain. So what do you know so far in terms of like COVID symptoms? Like like if you had to suspect COVID affected the brain, like what kind of symptoms do you think there currently exist?
I would maybe think about it might be connected to why some people lose their sense of smell or taste when they get COVID. I wonder if it's something like cuts off a circuitry in your brain that affects it, or I that's something I think the top of my head I would go for that.
It's interesting you bring that up. The article doesn't talk about losing a sense of smell, but now I'm really curious if what you pointed out was something the original research paper might have mentioned as well. Huh. So as I mentioned kind of earlier, a lot of people with COVID suffer certain cognitive effects. So brain fog, they're fatigued, tired, and recent research says that it's probably due to the spike protein. So I think I mentioned that last time as well.
Right. Sort of the things found on the surface of COVID.
Exactly. So you've seen like those pictures of COVID, right? Like under the electron microscope, and they have little feet right? Like it's a bunch of like little
Yeah.
protrusions.
It's like little
Fun fact,
thumbtacks.
right? That's actually why it's called coronavirus.
Wait, you lost me there. Wait, what? They're connected? Thumbtacks and
Yeah.
coronavirus?
Well, no, not the thumbtacks, but the
Oh.
protrusions, like coming
Okay.
out of the virus itself. Like if this was the virus, and then you got like the little things coming out. And it's because if you look at the virus through a microscope, it almost looks like the virus has like a crown. Like it's got the little things that come out of it on the sides. And the Latin word for crown is corona.
Corona.
So
Hey.
coronavirus, because it looks like it's got like a little crown. So
Right.
that's a sort of little fun fact.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. Holy crap, I just realized that.
Yeah. So basically, the spike protein is kind of like coronavirus's secret. It's not secret weapon, but it's de facto method of operating, because that protein is sort of the key to how the coronavirus DNA can get into host cells. So there's a recent paper. It's published in Nature Neuroscience by William A. Banks. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Washington School of Medicine, and he talks about how S1 actually causes damage not only when it's part of the coronavirus, but when it detaches too. So when it's just kind of freely floating around. So not just the virus, but the S1 protein, the spike protein itself,
Right.
causes damage.
It's sort of like if you, I guess if you're a small cell and you had a bunch of knives around your surface, and like the knife is floating around, just cutting things.
Yeah,
I guess that's
sorta.
the thing I'm picturing.
I don't think the protein reattaches itself to. I'm not sure about that, but it still causes chaos in your body. And
It's something that you don't want in your body. It's gonna cause harm.
Right. Absolutely. So basically, what happens is this S1 protein, or S1's a kind of glycoprotein. So a glycoprotein. Do you remember what that means from AP Bio?
Glycoprotein, like glucose.
I think everyone knows what a protein is. I think that's a
Yeah.
fair assumption.
Glyco. You have to remind me on that one.
So glycoprotein is the basis of protein, but it's got a bunch of carbs like attached to it, a bunch of carbohydrates or sugars
Okay.
that are connected to it, and it's responsible for, like, you find it on the surface of a lot of cells, but that's the spike protein. It is essentially a kind of glycoprotein, so that helps bind to different the surfaces of different cells.
I see.
And what happens is when it sort of detaches from the virus, it can also cause the brain to release inflammatory products, so things that encourage different organs to inflame or the immune system to attack them. And that's why just a couple minutes ago I mentioned the cytokines, those compounds that are responsible for regulating sort of that inflammatory response. So one of the things that's linked to COVID is what's called a cytokine storm. Have you heard of that before?
No, yeah. So you brought that up. I haven't heard that before. A
Okay,
storm.
so
That's
yeah,
interesting.
cytokine storm. It sounds like a punk metal name, like a rock band or something. Like, ooh, live from the I don't know, like from this stadium. Like, oh, it's the.
Sounds like the name of a hurricane, or like something on land.
It sounds sci-fi,
Like,
right?
yeah.
It sounds like science fiction, but actually, it's the body actually overreacts. It's like a positive feedback loop where it's like, okay, I see the cytokines and it's going to try and attack them, and then more cytokines get released, and then there's so much cytokine going through your body that your immune system's like all out brawl with your own body.
Mm-hmm.
So your body starts attacking itself, and you suffer these terrible symptoms. In terms of a very severe inflammation, in the brain and lung infections and stuff like that. So. COVID cytokine storm. It's like one of the byproducts of the COVID infection, and the S1 spike protein can contribute to that.
Interesting. So yeah, it causes our body to sort of overwork and
Right.
to fight off whatever is not supposed to be in our body, and when it overworks, it's going to inflame certain parts of our body. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's scary too. Like what I guess what parts it inflames specifically. So like are there only certain, I guess, organs that inflame more frequently than others?
There probably are, but I'm not too certain on the specifics there.
Just yeah, it's just a thought bubble. I don't know.
Yeah. So basically, this researcher, so Banks and some other researchers have noticed that S1 is very similar in behavior to the GP120 protein. If you wanted to guess,
GP120.
yeah, if you wanted to guess, like what other disease you think GP120 is from, it's also pretty deadly. And I mentioned, here's a big hint: it's an immune-related disease.
Has it? Was it like a long time ago, like 1,000 years ago, or is it like
No,
pretty
it's I mean, it's still a
recent?
problem now. It's still a problem now. Immune response.
Immune response.
It's a kind of virus.
like like a Spanish flu. The
Influenza. Okay, I like what you're thinking, but I'm actually
is it?
thinking of HIV.
Oh, that was the second one. That was the
HIV.
second one on my list. I was about to say.
But
Interesting.
yeah, so GP120 is the protein that HIV uses, and these researchers have figured out that they're both glycoproteins. They also both have the property of being able to cross the blood-brain barrier. Have you heard of that before? The blood-brain barrier?
So is it just the barrier between our brain and the bloodstream? That's what I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's
It's like a
but
gateway.
right, right. It's a defense mechanism that we have by default.
Okay, go on.
It prevents a lot of pathogens from being able to get from our blood into our brain, because our brain is kind of like super, like it needs a lot of extra defense. So that's one mechanism. But the kind of drawback to the blood-brain barrier is, a lot of medicines that target the brain are very. Did I say mental medicines?
I don't think you did.
Okay, I don't think because I don't think that's the right term, mental medicines. But a lot of medicines that target the brain have, like, for people who develop these medications, it's a pain, because you have to develop it in such a way that it actually slips through the barrier. Most of the time, existing compounds can't slip through, so you have to target the barrier somehow, and it has to like squeeze its way through. And these proteins, GP120 and S1 from HIV and COVID, can actually slip through the
Oh no.
barrier.
Oh no.
This research was done on mice, and the title of the article is it's highly suggestive that it may also have the same behavior in the human brain, that it can slip through the blood-brain barrier, which is why there may be all these cognitive effects. And they already proposed that, how people have a lot of respiratory problems with COVID, right?
Right,
Like
right.
probably the number one symptom associated with COVID is minor, or I think it's acute respiratory distress.
Mhm.
And what happens is that they think it might not be so much the lung infection as it is the brain getting infected as well. And your brain also regulates some of your breathing. So they think that maybe there's some response where your brain is like, they think that's another contributory mechanism to the symptoms.
Yeah, because we breathe automatically. We don't have to think to breathe.
Right.
So there has to be some part of our brain that that controls that.
I think it's the hypothalamus, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. The hypothalamus, because it looks at the carbon dioxide levels in our body, and it will try and auto-regulate, which is why we don't have to think about breathing. Although it's kind of funny you mentioned that. Have you ever seen that meme with the cat? Like it's a British short hair, and all it says is heavy breathing.
No, I haven't.
It's a super old meme. But the reason I bring it up is because, like, have you ever noticed every time someone mentions, like, hey, Ryan, you're breathing, you realize, like, you have to consciously think?
Yeah, I
Like,
know.
you're like,
I've tried to consciously think about like breathing, and it's weird. Or like consciously think of why I'm moving. It's like it's weird because you think about it, but then you kind of forget how to. Oh, not really forget how to do it, but for example, I guess a good example would be when I play basketball. If I'm thinking so hard about how I'm gonna make a layup, I'm gonna mess up. It's really weird because if I think about like every part of my body, like how it moves and how I'm gonna make that layup, I don't know about you, but like I would miss it.
oh no, absolutely. I mean, I don't play basketball. I'm definitely not as for anyone in the audience, I'm definitely not as physically active as Ryan. But I used to play the piano for quite a long time, and I found out, like, a lot of times when pianists practice, it's muscle memory, so you don't
Right.
even have to think about it. But the moment someone tells me like, "Hey, John, you're doing a really good job." I'm like,
Yeah.
I start panicking because I just realize like, oh my goodness, like they're like I have to think about which note I have to play, and I mess up, and I'm like, oh, shoot. But yeah, so they think that basically if this behavior is shown in humans, so disclaimer, this was research done on rats, but it's usually the reason we use these mice is because part of their anatomy reflects some parts of how the human body works. If it can cross the blood-brain barrier in mice, there's a very good chance the same behavior could be found in humans. So I always thought of these proteins kind of like landmines. Like after the virus is done, it's like, oh, let me leave one big, I'll just, steaming pile of poop for you with these proteins that cause these terrible inflammatory responses.
Yeah, no, that's it's like bringing everyone down while they're while they're going down.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean that's interesting. Also, I wonder if there's any research on just like previous, like just colds, that or like the Spanish flu or something that they also affect cognitive function. If there's like any linkage between those, I think that'd be interesting to look into. Because I'm assuming this isn't the first, this maybe not be the first, I guess, like link between cognitive function being affected and a virus in our body. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that, John?
I definitely agree with you. Like I feel like this is probably not like a new mechanism. Like it's probably been seen before, but there's still some research being done to make sure this is a thing. And it looks like I was mistaken. Like you mentioned the loss of smell and whether or not that was linked. I think it was actually mentioned in this article. So I totally forgot about that. I'm looking at my notes again here, but it says that the experiments have shown that S1 transports faster in the olfactory bulb. So you know how smell works for humans, right? Like the exact kind of mechanism or rough idea, at least.
We sniff it through our nose, and then our brain does some calculations, and then we're like, oh, that smells like pineapple.
It's not a wrong assumption. But basically, what happens is so behind our nose there's a nasal cavity, right? It's kind of like a chamber. It's sort of above the mouth. The air goes through, and there are these nerve endings that are responsible for kind of detecting different smells. And those nerve endings are just above so this is like the front of my brain. Mm-hmm. And if you go right, like underneath it, like right here, those nerve endings, that's the olfactory bulb. It's kind of the bridge between your brain and those nerve endings. So S1 actually affects that area. So that might be the loss of taste.
So it's probably binding to those like neurons, or those neural those neural connections.
It's probably causing the inflammation, like the cytokines. I wouldn't be surprised.
And how some people do regain their sense of smell and taste. Yeah, that's I wonder if like the inflammatory response has like decreased, so that way they're able to regain those. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's definitely got to be able to do that. And
that makes sense. Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, it also travels in kidneys. So it's in the kidneys as well.
Kidneys freak me out. I thought they were pretty big, but they look, at least I thought they were like big, like beans in the back of our.
Wait, no, hold up. How big did you think a kidney was?
I thought they were at least like 6 feet. I mean, I'm not 6 feet.
How's that gonna fit in that?
I said 6 feet.
6 feet.
Like 6 inches. My bad. Or like 8
inches.
This
goes back to we've just proven the stereotype.
I'm dead.
That engineers are like, how like people joke like engineers are bad at math, so we make approximations, right?
Yeah.
Like pi is equal to e is equal to 3. I've seen that one before.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you're just saying like, do you remember from physics, x is equal to sine of x for very small x?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember that in mathematics. Like you're even in 21A, like in like your first calculus course, they'll talk about that, like x equals sine x, and they'd plug that in. I'm like, what? That's cheating.
Yeah, I'm like you can't do exactly. I'm like, you can't do this. How could you make that assumption? Illegal.
Yeah.
And then every time I felt like every time I had to use it, I felt like they were gonna mark me down. Like, no, you can't use it here. And I'm like, but how do you know when to use it? And they're like, oh, it's just a feeling. And I'm like, what do you mean it's just a feeling? Like,
right.
But
it's just what's it called? Not instinct. It's just what's the other word? Like intuition. It's just intuition.
okay,
Yeah.
intuition. Yeah, it's not a bad assumption. Intuition. So yeah, so basically, the research also shows that the S1, like, it goes faster. It travels faster through the olfactory bulb and the kidneys of men, which might explain why men seem to have more severe symptoms more often than women, because S1 seems to travel through
Huh.
the male body faster than the woman's. Although
What? Wow.
we're not sure why. So
They're zooming through the men.
yeah, I guess so. And
It just
it's a pretty unfortunate thing, but
wow.
yeah. So that's the latest. So once again, it's not confirmed that. Or I mean, the article makes it sound like S1 is definitely like going through the human brain, but I mean, this was research done on mice. So, but it's very promising. It's very promising.
Wow. Future of post COVID, post pandemic, but technically post COVID, more post COVID, I would term it, because we can't really say we're done with pandemics because we've had pandemics like Spanish flu, H1N1, AIDS. So all those sorts of, I guess they weren't as scaled as COVID, but they were definitely flags to have like further looked into that stuff. So my article is going to be what will life be after the coronavirus pandemic ends? And so, but I guess before we get into that, I wanted to first go over some previous post pandemics, and because obviously this is not the first pandemic to have happened, and yeah, so let's go into that real quick. And I guess let me first define pandemic, because a lot of times that can get confused with epidemic, which sometimes people want to interchange those words, but obviously they're two different meanings. So pandemic is this is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It's something that occurs over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, and typically affecting a significant proportion of the population. So yeah, and an epidemic though is sort of the opposite of that, where it only affects like a certain community, I guess, a certain niche of the population, and it doesn't affect a significant proportion of the population. So it's sort of the inverse of pandemic. And so yeah, so I guess let me go over some of the first pandemic that was recorded in history. So I don't know if you know about this, John, but do you know like the first?
Is it influenza? Can I guess influenza?
Nope.
Oh, it's not.
No,
Okay.
this is way before the influenza. Like I'm talking
Plague?
about BC era.
BC. Oh wow.
Yeah.
I can't say I know anything.
Okay. But yeah, so let me go ahead and talk about it. So in 430 BC, during the Peloponnesian War, so this war was between the Spartans and Athenians, and so then these were two of the most powerful city-states in ancient Greece, and this time frame was about 431 to 405 BC. So this disease swept through Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, and it crossed Athens' walls as the Spartans were sieging. So this really weakened Athens' community, as you can imagine, a pandemic or this sickness, and 2/3 of the population died. And so to give perspective of the numbers of people that lived in Athens, so the population of Athens at the time that occurred was around 610,000 to 360,000. So, and this is a big estimate because the number of slaves, medics, which were non-citizens, and
Okay.
Athenian families. So it's like a very big estimation.
Yeah,
You know
because
what I'm saying?
that's like a plus minus 300,000. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a pretty. Yeah, I mean, if you took a math exam with that kind of probability, you'd probably fail.
yeah. So and it was so and with the 2/3 population dying, it would have killed approximately 400,000 to 240,000 people,
Wow.
which is, I mean, you have 600,000. If you have like best case scenario, you have 610,000 people. You wipe out, and you're left with 200,000 people. That's a big number. And so this sickness was what weakened Athens and what contributed to their loss to the Spartans, And a couple of symptoms from this disease, and this was actually recorded by I wrote it. Oh, according to, I am gonna butcher the name, but it's Thucydides.
Oh,
Thucydides.
I know who you're talking about. It's like Thucydides or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and he was an Athenian historian and general. So he recounted the war. He recounted this, or he noted this at the time. So that's where we get these numbers. But yeah, and
What's
so
the Are you about to tell me what the virus is or what the disease is?
they called it the Athen fever. That's what they.
Wow.
Yeah, I have.
Huh.
Yeah, so they.
I'm curious if they can get like a DNA sample because you know how there's been always been this like just going like pulling back to COVID, I guess, but like a lot of people are worried like, oh my gosh, the vaccine is going to change my DNA. The actual thing they should be scared about is in history, a lot of viral DNA becomes part of human DNA.
Oh,
Like historically,
I think that as we
over
adapt,
thousands.
to the different mutations of viruses, right?
Well, no, I mean like literally parts of the DNA just gets left out. They become part of the human genome.
Wow.
So we have traces of prehistoric viral DNA, just part of our own.
Huh.
And it's just kind of sitting there. I mean,
Wow. That's
so I wonder if they can get like a DNA sample from those dead Athenians and maybe figure out what this. Because I'm just curious. Like, what if it's also COVID related? I mean, it could be a precursor.
Oh, yeah.
You never know.
You never know. Yeah. And so they actually made tied to this to actually be to the typhoid fever.
Oh, okay, typhoid. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard of that one.
And so they say it was similar to that, but luckily the typhoid fever is treatable with vaccinations, and only 20,000 cases per year in the United States on that sickness. So fun fact. I
Wait,
guess fun
typhoid's
fact.
still a thing?
Yeah, and it's only right now less than 20,000 cases per year in the United States.
In the U.S.?
Yeah, in the U.S. Yep.
Wow. I thought most children, well, I guess it's not by law, but most children like to go to a school. Like, don't you need like a Tdap shot? It's like typhoid, diphtheria, and you get like a booster shot, like when you're a little older. Because I remember like going through my records, I know I had that vaccine.
Yeah,
I didn't know typhoid's still a thing. Wow.
I guess it's just for people that are affected that aren't able to get those vaccinations. I'm assuming
That's
it's
true.
probably those cases. Like you can't assume everyone's going to take the vaccine.
Right,
different-
right. But I mean, the goal is that for those, I mean, it's not so much to help anti-vaxxers. It's to help people who can't take the vaccine because they're immunocompromised. It's to develop herd immunity, right? So if a certain percentage, and a very large percentage, take the vaccine, then those at risk that can't take it will be safe because you can immediately mitigate how quickly the vaccine travels.
Right. And so yeah, so let me the list of pandemics that occurred after the 1350s. I create a little fun list. Is so the not fun. Oh my gosh, that's so dark humor. Oh my god, that's not fun. Many people died. So yeah, this is like serious stuff. So the first one is the Black Death, which is I think
The bubonic plague.
Yeah, everyone probably learned that from history in their history classes.
It's like a third of the world population, or
yeah, it's a huge number of people died, and
yeah, because that thing went from Europe. Well, I don't know where exactly it originated, but it spread over like the entire continent.
Right. And so the next one is the Fiji measles, and this was actually so the Fiji population they got hit. Their population got hit. 1/3 of their population died after the visitation of Queen Victoria from British Empire. So she carried this, and this was after they Fiji ceded to the British Empire, and so she wanted to come and give thanks, or like as from the treaty that they did, and she brought over this measles sickness and.
Yeah, they don't have like a natural immunity towards it, huh?
Nope. Yeah, it was yeah, no. And so the next one is the Russian flu, which noted here at 360,000 people died. The Spanish flu, a big 50 million deaths worldwide, which is insane. And then the HIV/AIDS, 35 million deaths worldwide. and now up to now, right before COVID, SARS, and then COVID. So
Wow.
yeah, but those some of them I did. Some of the other, I guess, sicknesses I left out, but and sort of I guess
Those are just some like notable examples, right?
right, yeah, yeah, just notable examples
Okay.
that I wanted to share, and then so now it's like, how do these pandemics even occur, right? Let's say, for example, what if instead of as a human species we weren't hunter and gatherers and we didn't shift over to an agrarian life where we where it's agriculture based, things like these pandemics where there's where we live in an agrarian lifestyle where we're always in contact with people, we're social, or at least we need to go out and like get some food at the grocery store. We sort of depend on markets for food, unless you're a farmer, I guess. But we
Everything's centralized, right?
yeah, sort of central, yeah, and we have communities. And these communities are sort of what allow for epidemics to occur easier because people are always in contact. You're talking to someone. You're gonna go meet with someone in person. And not even off that, with community you need transportation, and you look at the United States, global, and not even in the United States, you look at globally, we need global transportation now, planes, trains going from here to like Canada, I don't know, from everywhere. Oh, and then we have a bot that stopped by. We should delete that
Oh yeah.
real quick.
Oh, let's see.
Can you delete that on your end?
Oh, I can only click to reply. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Is it mod view?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Let me skip all.
Get that out of here. We don't want any of that.
It's just probably block them, right?
Yeah, just block them.
Okay.
Because it's a bot account. So
There we go.
How these pandemics occur from the just global transportation, huge population size that we have, our ways of social interactions and communities, they all factor into sort of why pandemics occur in the first place. And so from this article, I sort of mashed two of them together. But let's start off with the first one being lessons from past pandemics that we've sort of tried to, now that someone made this article to sort of list out things that we should sort of learn from past pandemics. And the first one being is that names matter. So, like, what do you think that means, John?
Names matter.
Names
so,
matter.
like the name of the virus or the disease, right?
Right.
I think it's the origin. So I think it gives a hint as to the origin or method of transmission. Like if we call it bird flu, people will know like, oh, so this flu comes from birds. Or I guess let's see, SARS kind of gives you a hint as to the side effect of the disease. I think that's what it means.
Okay. What about like I guess Spanish flu or the Russian flu?
Well,
those terminology.
Country of origin, right? We would assume country of origin. But I know current WHO guidelines do not. They usually don't condone naming a disease after its country of origin, which is why it's some terrible sort of remarks from as we see like the alternative name for COVID, which is absolutely not correct.
So, so naming it in this way creates inaccurate messages and making the flu seem distant. So, for example, like the Spanish flu, or what the Russian flu, or like for example, in the COVID, the whole debate, between the China flu, quote unquote,
right, which is a pretty terrible. Terrible name.
Right. And it sort of creates that distance, like, oh, that's over there. It's not going to come over here, like it sort of creates that stigma that some scholars are saying that affect the way we react, that we'll respond to it as a human, as like a person. So so that's one of them. The second one being, and there's a total of 6. So the first one, so names matter. The second one being social distancing works. And I think we all can agree to that. that especially there's even a mathematical equation that shows this and there's simulations done that show that when you're social distancing, you're reducing the number of people being affected by one another, and overall you're increasing the time or reducing the spread as we separate. And the third one, so the third one on the list is viruses don't spare the young, which in this case, COVID, there are some cases where it did affect younger people, and it does.
I mean, bringing it back to like what I said earlier, right? COVID has a number of varying. So some people may have absolutely terrible, illnesses, and others may not be affected at all. And Pseudo here says, so tired of COVID. We feel you. I mean, it's staying in isolation for so long is definitely taken a toll, I think, on everyone, and everyone's itching to be able to go back to normal life. But of course, in order to do that, there are still a number of precautions we have to take to make sure there isn't a third or fourth wave of COVID. So we got to play it safe.
Right. And so the fourth one on the list is inoculation works. And so have you heard of inoculation? Inoculation.
Isn't that just another term for vaccination?
Sort of, yeah. So I'll give you a little history on this one. During the smallpox epidemic that swept across North America from 1775 to 1782, Revolutionary War soldiers took an unusual approach to protecting themselves from the virus known as variola major. So, this is so in a process called inoculation, or also known as variolation, they took virus-loaded material from an infected person's smallpox, and this word is pustule, which is a small blister or pimple that contains pus. And they carved an incision into the flesh of a healthy soldier, and they rubbed it in. So, basically what we're starting to do with vaccinations, where we take it, we insert in our body.
Only like 100 times more sanitary.
Yeah, 100 times, yeah. So this concept of vaccination is named after the Latin word for cow or vaca.
Okay.
So another when you brought up the Latin word for, what was it again?
Crown. Like why we call the coronavirus the coronavirus.
Right.
The Latin word for crown is corona.
Right. So some cool naming origins. And the fifth one being, don't blame the stick, and don't blame the sick. I said stick. Don't blame the stick. But instead, we should be focusing on collaboration, on beating this virus as a community, social distancing, wearing face masks, and all that good measure. Even after this mRNA vaccination, I believe there's still, like you said, John.
Yeah. There still should be a time period where those are enforced, but eventually it will get to a point where they can slowly lift these restrictions.
Right. And then and the sixth one means just this can end, with our advancement in technology and medicine. The way we're able to handle this pandemic, we should be much more better with our sort of tools we have at hand to attack it. So, that's sort of the positive note at the end. Is
I think I'm like you mentioned the mRNA, right? And I think it's really great that we've got more research on that front, because in the future, as Ryan said, like this isn't the only pandemic that's happened in history. Maybe in the next 10 or 20 years, there may be another pandemic, but we will have the tools ready to go. We can, we'll manufacture that vaccine and get it out in no time. So I think that's once again, as you mentioned, a really positive note.
Yeah, so that's like looking forward post-COVID. And so now this other article, which I'm going to go into, is what will life, so this is the title I guess I began with, what will life be like after the coronavirus pandemic ends? So let me check 1 second. So this from this article, the author interviewed I think 6 experts, but I wrote down 4 of them because the other 2 sort of repeated what some of the other experts said. So I picked 4 sort of different outtakes on this. Oh, sorry, 3. I reported 3 from what they said. So the first one being John Barry, who is the author of The Great Influenza, the story of the deadliest pandemic in history. And so his take on it. So I want to sort of get what you think also, John, on these sort of
Okay, fair
expert,
enough.
like what they think is going to happen, or maybe if chat wants to chime in on what they think will happen.
Yeah, yeah. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so I sort of thought this would be kind of full interactive one, but so John Barry, let's sort of give it a little summary. Is what he said will happen is, so if vaccines are effective and immunity lasts for several years, and if we have broad usage of cheap, rapid antigen tests that can basically assure safety for everyone around people, for I guess for people around other people, Barry would see more people working from home, more work from teledoc services, and a big impact on small, and it's going to impact small businesses probably the most. And albeit, I would say it would affect them in a harm. I think like not to be negative, but like in a worse way than it would affect bigger companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, or not even that, like in the food industry, you know, In and Out, all those other big food industries, big food company names. And then he also says that if virus remains, Barry could also see changes in housing market where people live and work from the comfort of their own homes. And he also mentioned that the interior design of buildings would change post pandemic, which is interesting. I wonder if there's something like deeper. And he said there would be more cars and less mass transit, which I'm all for. In California, I think
More
there's
cars?
more cars but less mass transit. Or
Why
like,
more cars though?
uh, I'm. That's what I thought about too. I'm like, I don't. Why would he say more cars if we're all staying
Oh,
at
he
home?
said he. Oh, so the
Yeah.
author said more
No,
cars.
no, not me. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I mean, it sort of makes sense though because mass transit, like in the name, right? It relies on the fact that there's a high volume of people who need to go to certain
Oh,
locations in the city repeatedly, right?
that's right.
Um, but I think the point makes sense because if there's less people for mass transit, more people will kind of independently decide to maybe take a motorcycle or a car. Oh, it looks like Suda here has a I think something to add here. So I think it will be different for a bit. The hardest part I feel will be hard to determine when to lift the mandates. That's a very excellent point. Too long and the population gets irritated, but too short and it isn't effective. More cars because yeah, okay. So Suda also latched onto it. Less large travel, more personal. Very very true.
Right, right.
So yeah, we don't know exactly where that mandate will end. I mean, we've seen how these mandates work, right? The American people have spoken. Like they don't like some of the harsh restrictions that the rest of Europe or the rest of the world have enforced. Like not like I mean here at least we don't have the curfews yet or any of that stuff, but at that I mean, other places you can't even step outside. You can't even so much as open the front door.
Right, like
So
what happened in Italy with the real
yeah,
shutdown. Like they
yeah.
weren't able to leave their they
And they had a very absolute tragedy. Yeah,
yeah,
the number of lives lost.
right.
But
But yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, more cars because more people are going to want to have their own cars to travel, and they don't want to go
right,
to like the BART, for example,
right.
to take that, or like
And I
any
think
major train station, like in New York, like all those mass transits.
I I think it's also like kind of stigmatized too, because like the moment like you think like a lot of regulations or guidelines like don't get a bunch of people in a very small area, but that's exactly what mass transit is, isn't it? Like you
Yeah,
sit in a bus with all these people and same with like metro stations or other forms of mass transit. So I think a part of that reason for more personal transit is the stigma. Like there's a growing stigma for that kind of stuff.
right. And yeah, so that's John Barry's take. Now let's go ahead and move on to Catherine Hirschfield, who is a medical anthropologist at the University of Oklahoma, author of Gangster States, Organized Crime, Kleptocracy, Kleptocracy, and Political
Oh,
Collapse.
kleptocracy.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, yeah, what John said. And so Catherine believes that there will be an increase in political division and increase in economic inequality in the U.S. and elsewhere. She also says if the vaccine does control the virus, our post-COVID world would be a post-pandemic world, as there will still be other virus threats. Which I agree with that second point that she brought up, that even though we're done with COVID, if we or like we would be done with COVID, there is still now we should really wake up and say, okay, you know, in we should have better responses sort of these pandemics. So
Yeah,
and it's sort of
absolutely.
going to be it's going to be a post-pandemic world, which yeah, I agree. But yeah, what are your thoughts, John?
I think so. I really like that point where of like, okay, now we know like we need to be better prepared for these kinds of pandemics. Like just as how the U.S. has like a number of sort of like national strategies in place, like for defense, in case like a foreign nation attacks. There should be like a national strategy for pandemics. Like the moment there's confirmation, like the chain of command, and we immediately implement these measures. Like no
Mm.
ifs, ands, or buts. Like you just go for it. Because the more time you let this pandemic fester and grow, the harder or near impossible it is to attack it. And both of the authors you mentioned have made excellent points about the economic inequality. I think that's something we see a lot these days. I think Amazon, especially because so many people are staying at home,
Hmm.
have been reaping a lot of money. A lot of smaller businesses are dying, and
Yeah.
and a lot of analysts have pointed out that the disparity between the lower class and upper class has been growing quite quickly, and it's been exacerbated by the current conditions.
Right. And then, yeah, I mean that's a great point you brought up, John, about the smaller businesses. I feel like will be impacted the most. And she also brings up like political division, like an increase in political division. I would say at the beginning of I guess pre-COVID, sort of. Oh no, I'm sorry. Like the middle of COVID, people were sort of coming together. I think we were trying to fight it off, right, and trying to stick together. Um, but a lot of things has happened, and I think it's interesting that yeah, like an increased in political division would. I mean, I hope for the best. Can't really say much
Right,
about.
but I totally understand. Like you mentioned political division. I mean, if you think about it, uh, the whole coronavirus is also sort of an effective. It can be weaponized against an enemy political party if used properly. I mean, you could easily one party can say the other one mismanaged things, or the other party can say, "Well, you guys didn't do enough to help," and it's a very divisive issue. But I
Hmm.
think that's, as you mentioned, that's already on top of some existing problems that we might currently see. But it's interesting to hear the political divide. I haven't really thought about that too much. I think both of us have been a little like I think we can see the economic effects a lot more immediately.
Yeah. No. Yeah. For sure. Um, and so the third author, or I guess the
Oh, before
third
you go,
expert.
Pseudo says that COVID has become severely political, which I think absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fact that I think it's just in the U.S. that the skepticism towards a lot of the pre-established science of COVID is alarming. I think it's very disconcerting to see that because I don't think like you look at Europe, you don't see as many people who are anti-vax or they don't believe in a lot of the science behind it. Whereas here in the U.S. There are just so many people who are willing to question these guidelines or to just waive them outright.
All right. Yeah. So I guess we'll go into the last expert that said that, and she talks about schooling. So she's a sociologist at the Indiana University, Bloomington. Um, and did I say her name already? Anna Mueller.
Oh, I don't think you said the name,
Okay. Yeah.
but good catch. Good catch.
Yeah, Anna Mueller. And so Mueller says that for school, online teaching can be a tool that can make classrooms more accessible, particularly for students with anxiety or living with significant pain, since they can now just turn on the camera and join a class from the comfort of the homes. Now, I first read this and thought about, wait, I don't really see that for, I guess, high school and lower, so like from K to 12. I could see this maybe in college when you're away from home, or like you can have the opportunity to, I guess, to leave and go somewhere else to study study education. Um, so I'm assuming she's talking from a standpoint of the university because she's a sociologist at the university, and talking about college students. Um, but if this was like talked about high school students and K through 8, I would disagree with this. And the reason
You
why
saying like the anxiety component or the
or just being easy, I guess. How classes are more accessible online, or even if the student's living with anxiety or like significant pain, because they're living in, I'm picturing like they're living with, like you said, anxiety or significant pain, where they're always going to be home, and there's no way for them to escape that environment, if that makes sense. So,
I see your argument, but I'm willing to argue the other way. Like if you let me play devil's advocate
yeah,
here,
yeah, go ahead.
you've reduced the barrier because part of the things with having certain mental health conditions is it's very hard to find the motivation to do things we would find normal people would label as productive. And I think if you lower that barrier, like, okay, well, now I can just click a link and I can do my schoolwork from home. That might make things easier. Of course, full disclaimer: Ryan and I are not mental health experts.
Nope.
By no means, don't take this as this is sort of our cursory, our superficial analysis of the data at hand. So as you can see, Ryan and I are just, we're just having this kind of back and forth debate here. I'm playing devil's advocate. So basically, whatever Ryan says, I'm just trying to disagree with, just to see what the other side of the coin is here. But it's interesting to hear that from sociology. You said
Yeah, sociologist.
Okay.
And so then she also states that given the number of families that have lost jobs or income, there will be an increase in children who have experienced deprivation, insecurity, and traumatic stress. Which
that I can understand.
That I 100% agree. But yeah, going back to the first one, I guess I sort of see the viewpoint of if the student is in that environment, then having that link just to click on is much more beneficial than to, I guess, go to school.
But if I were to play your side, not everyone has the same kind of mental configuration, right? Like some people need that physical environment. They need the transition, almost like how when I was living closer to our university, it forces my brain to focus more on schoolwork. But then going home, I mean, home's my time to relax. Like I don't think of schoolwork when I'm back at home. So for some people that's even more crucial because different people operate differently. They learn through different means. So I'd say remote learning is definitely a mixed bag. But what I actually wanted to ask you, Ryan, is with remote learning, it's kind of like shown how much money universities, like we pay these exorbitantly high costs, right?
That's like really you hit something, and we can speak this from personal experience because of our situation.
Right. I mean, we still pay the same despite the fact that we're not going physically to a campus. We don't use any campus services.
We don't use the ARC. I mean, we don't use the gym facilities and all that. We don't use the counseling services. That also sort of, I guess, well, not everyone. Yeah, never mind. I think we do use, some people do use that. A lot of people use that. I personally have used that. But what are some other examples that we don't use with our tuition?
It doesn't. I guess some of the. I'm not too certain about specifics, but I mean, like a lot of
the library.
The large majority of research has shown, like many students are in agreement that we should not be paying full, or we should be receiving like refunds at best. Now, I know there's an argument that yes, the universities have a lot of people that work under them; they need to be paid, and I understand that side of the argument as well. Although I'm biased towards the idea that we should not have to pay, like full tuition for all this stuff, and because as a student, but also just because there's been a general upset over how over the years tuition for colleges has gone through the roof.
Right, and the gap between how much you make per hour versus the amount of money you need to pay for tuition, the gap, it's increasing. Like there's no
inflation, right?
Right.
I mean,
there's no.
I think the U.S. is the only. I'm pretty sure the U.S. is the only nation in the world that does not have some policy that corrects for inflation. So it's almost like how you'll find a lot of I think people in our generation who are upset at hearing people from prior generations say like, "Oh, I was able to pay off college with a job in the service industry." But if you look at the rate of inflation, I mean, of course, back then you could, but now absolutely not. You can't even, so it's
you only scratch the surface with the service
job.
Right,
it's a hotly contested subject, absolutely.
Yeah, but I would 100% say like if there's some way to make college cheaper, especially right now with virtual class, there should be some way to implement that, and yeah, like just to make tuition cheaper, but they're not doing it. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. It doesn't
Old habits die hard, huh?
it
I
doesn't
mean, I
doesn't make
understand that.
any sense.
What do you think about work? Like you mentioned, one of those experts you mentioned remote work. What do you think about the future of work
And
post
that
COVID?
and yeah, like if I was in that position I was able to work remotely from home, especially if it's like a software position, yeah, I would 100% want that because I gotta save money on gas, I gotta save money on time spent driving back and forth. Um, there's a lot of money that's being saved, I say.
I feel like
And you
I
get
feel
to
like
one more thing, you gotta cook. You gotta cook at home. You'll have time to cook, your own food.
that's true.
Maybe even live a healthier lifestyle because you'll be, be able to cook for yourself. Because a lot of times,
Yeah.
I think this is actually an interesting point because a lot of times when you're tired from work, you don't want to cook. You gotta drive home.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
gonna go to McDonald's to get a real quick stop of like a burger, you know.
Right. Right.
So
I remember in one of my internships, I used to always go to like this place that had like dim sum. I'd have so much like takeout, and then
mhm.
I wouldn't feel that. I mean, I know it's not good for health. I mean, if you guys know anything about Chinese food, we go absolutely crazy, over all the oils and stuff. But it tastes so good. But do you feel? Okay, I know I'm dragging this around, but do you feel like software engineers, like literally nothing really hurt software engineers? I mean, like a lot of people
Yeah.
did lose
Yeah.
internship opportunities and work, but I feel like for most companies, like software engineers are like, oh, so I just don't come into the office because it's computer software, right? Like you can, as long as you have Git access and
Yeah.
network like a company VPN,
Wi-Fi.
I think you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the extraordinary thing about software jobs is that now people are like, oh wait, now I can just work from home with the software job. All I need is Wi-Fi. I already have that at my home.
But also, I think what this pandemic's really sort of brought out is our reliance on the internet, right? Like the
Okay.
current state of the internet in the United States is not great. There are a lot of large companies that have, really monopolized the internet, and in terms of like social media, Google, Facebook, what have it,
Mhm.
and they have. There's also been. What was that? Oh, I just lost my train of thought
I
here.
guess our dependency on these big companies to use their technologies has
Well, I mean,
increased.
it's also alarming that these companies have so much power,
Mhm.
over how consumers can access the internet and
Data, like
right,
the amount
absolutely.
of data that's out there just for
I think
free.
there's a law got passed a couple years back that said ISPs can sell your DNS data. So when you when you do Google searches or any kind of like web search, it goes to a DNS server.
Mhm.
If that's like an ISP related server, they can take that info and sell it if they want to.
Right.
But yeah, I think this is a wake up call. Like we should have some more regulations, and that's
Yeah.
my opinion. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. But
As we transition to being more dependent on the power of the internet, there needs to be I would say, changes in the way we regulate internet traffic, just as we regulate, traffic, driving or I guess in person
right,
laws.
right,
There
absolutely.
there needs to be some type of adaption. Is that even a word? We need to adapt.
I would just say reform.
Reformed,
Maybe
yeah.
reform. Yeah,
So,
definitely. Well, it looks like we're at the 1 hour 30-minute mark.
yeah, I think.
I think this is the first time we've had a podcast go on for a longer than an hour.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, these topics are pretty, spicy.
Very nuanced. Very very interesting to talk about. I definitely. But also, like, we weren't planning to go to add the extra 30 minutes until like our viewership rose, right? Like, wasn't the plan? Once the audience like grew big enough, then we'd stick around. But we got 2 viewers though. That's pretty nice.
That's nice.
I mean, it could just be the both of us though. I mean, I point because
I
we
wouldn't be
both have
surprised.
we both have Twitch open, so.
But yeah, I think we'll go ahead and end it here. John, what do you say?
Yeah, I think we did a great job. I mean, I was able to cover the miRNA and how it regulates COVID reproduction rates, as well as the spike proteins and their sort of similarity to GP120, the HIV protein. And then you were able to talk about some of these historical pandemics, what we've learned from them, as well as how some experts think the future is going to look post COVID. So I think we really covered a lot of amazing ground. And once again, Ryan and I are both very thankful for those of you that such as Scotty and Pseudo that were able to drop by and contribute. We love being able to interact with you guys and learn new things, see different sides of the same issue. So once again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So so thank you guys for watching this episode of OX2C podcast. We're gonna upload this.
And happy holidays.
Oh,
happy
yes.
holidays.
Happy holidays. To whatever you're celebrating, hope you have a good time with your family, friends, loved ones, wherever you are in the world. And so we'll go ahead and just post this on YouTube for those of you that want to watch it again. But
and stay safe. Don't forget to stay safe this season.
Yes, sir. So
thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.